Hello and welcome inside a special live edition of IndyStar Preps Weekly. This is our sectional pairings reaction show. My name is Brian Haenchen, joined as always by Kyle Neddenriep, Akeem Glaspie. Kyle, they said Akeem looks better live, and I'll be darned, they were right.
They were right. Everyone was right.
Wow. Thank you, Brian. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
I know. I saw your pick, so I feel like it was just necessary to build you up a little bit. You had a rough weekend.
Let's save something for Tuesday because we got a lot to talk about.
That's right. We did. So the sectional draw happened. That's why people are here. I understand. It's fun. It's fun. The lottery balls, the drawing of names is fun. And, it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. I know Akeem's a fan. I don't know why, but I think it's dumb. Kyle, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, you say what you will about the sectional draw. It's definitely not for everybody, but it always is, sort of something everybody looks forward to anyway, to find out who they're playing, where they're playing, what the path is, and we found out tonight there's a lot of interesting matchups right off the bat this year, and there always is, but especially in 6A, you have a couple that we'll get to that are going to be really head knocker type games and teams that'll be knocked out who could be playing at Lucas Oil Stadium if things go right. So that'll make it a lot of fun. It'll make it very nerve-wracking for those fan bases and those coaches and players. But we'll get to all that because there's a lot to discuss, and I think some really fun games coming up ahead.
Before we get into breaking down the draw itself, for folks who aren't aware, tournament play starts in Class 4A through Class A on October 21st. And then for the big classes, 5A, 6A, it starts the week after. And then state finals for all six are the weekend of Thanksgiving, November 25th and 26th. Before we dive in things, Kyle, I'm just curious, big picture, broad strokes, I guess. Overall with the draw, were there a bunch of disappointing matchups in the first round where you have like the top two teams in the sectional going head to head, or was it a little more balanced out, so to speak, this year?
It was more balanced, I thought. There are some sectionals, and Triton to kind of preview. Triton Central Cicino was one I was curious about because those two teams, I think, are realistic. Teams who could make it all the way to Lucas Oil in 2A, and they ended up on the opposite side of the bracket. So in a sectional like that, and that's an 8-teamer, and we'll get into that too. Where 1A through 4A, they're all 8-team or 7-team brackets, whereas the larger schools are in 4-team brackets for the most part. There's a 5 out there, but yeah. So there are some where very clearly the two best teams are on opposite sides of the bracket, and that's how I think you mentioned the seeding and the non-seeding that we do here in Indiana, but that kind of sets up as a seeding, at least in that particular case. And Whiteland, Franklin, similarly in 5A. So there's some of those, and then there are others that we'll talk about that didn't quite work out that way.
Akeem, you ready to get into this thing?
Yeah, I think I'm just ready for the games to count now. I mean, again, with the non-seeding, the regular season, it is what it is, but we're starting to get to the finish line in a way where, things are starting to really count. So, yeah, I'm excited.
I'm curious. I don't think we've ever actually gotten your thoughts on the topic. Kyle's talked about it. I whine a lot. What do you think of the sectional draw?
Yeah, I mean, I started my journalism career in Massachusetts, and they had a power ranking system where, everything was scored, and, there's a formula that I knew at one time that I don't remember anymore that calculated your points and everything. So there was seeding, and I thought that was pretty cool. Again, everything mattered, and strength of schedule mattered, and all that stuff mattered. So I just think that was cool. I enjoyed that. But, it is what it is, and, we have what we have. So maybe if we complain enough, something will change. But until then, we'll make do.
Good stuff, good stuff. All right, well, let's get into things, and let's start in Class 6A. Kyle and Akeem with Sectional 3. As I pull that one up here on my computer screen, this is live, so you guys get to experience this in real time. The stuff that Clark normally edits out. Sectional 3, excuse me. That is this is fun. I hate my computer. Fishers at Fort Wayne Northrop in Game 1, Game 2, Homestead at Hamilton Southeastern with the winners playing in the championship round. Kyle, let's start with you. Just your thoughts on the matchups that we have in there.
Well, I think that one's going to be, it's a mudsock game, basically, is what it's going to come down to. I mean, in all honesty, and nothing against Fort Wayne Northrop and Homestead, because you got to beat those two teams to get there, obviously. But, I just think all year it's kind of been, I covered that, and I know Clark was there as well. HSC beat Fishers in overtime in the first matchup, the regular season matchup between the teams. It was fantastic atmosphere, awesome night, red on one side for Fishers and blue on the other. And really, you could argue Fishers for a large part of that game played better than HSC did. HSC made some huge plays down the stretch of that game and got it into overtime. and then took advantage. And and Fishers ended up missing an extra point on a. It was kind of just on the exchange on the holder and the snapper, but and then HSE scored to win it, and hadn't lost since. So they'll play Brownsburg this week with the Hoosier Crossroads Conference title on the line, and a large challenge ahead of them to beat Brownsburg, who's been #1 for a big chunk of this season. But after that they start focusing on Fishers and the potential to play in that sectional championship game. And it's been a while. HSE hasn't won a sectional championship in quite a while. And you could argue if they might be the favorite on the north side of that bracket the way they've played all season. When you talk about 6A, you always have to remember, you have HSE, this sectional with Fishers, and the sectional 4, which we'll talk about too, coming from the north side, not the south. So that's another part of this that you have to keep in mind. But really like this Fishers team. As you see there, Carson Dunn is a bulldog of a running back, and Kobe Martin also very good running back, and they do like to run the ball and do it really well. So it'll be another slobber knocker type game. Like I said, it'll be a week out. Those teams will not play each other in the first round, but will play each other if they both win in the championship game. So that kind of worked out well. It's one of those you mentioned which sectionals kind of worked out. As far as like if you were seeding it, this is definitely sectional 3 is one of them that worked out in that sense.
Kyle, obviously Fishers, after losing to HSE, go out and lose the next week to Brownsburg, but they've come back since with wins over to Avon and Franklin Central. How do you feel about where the Tigers are trending here over the past couple weeks?
Yeah, I mean I would still probably they're better than they were a year ago. I think they're just more solid all around, and have played defensively better over the course of this season, I think, than they did a year ago. And like I said, I mean, you look back to that HSE game, and I felt like for a large part of that game, they outplayed HSE, but they didn't win. So you don't look at it that way necessarily. But I think they're going to be plenty motivated, especially after losing that first time. You kind of wonder what that does to you mentally. That should help them, maybe give them a little bit of an edge, when that matchup happens. But HSE's been really good all year long, and you talk about their running back Alexander and Hamilton at receiver, and they've got a very good defense and all very well coached by Michael Kelly, who's done a great job since he got there. So this HSE team is the real deal, and they could be playing down here. We're sitting here pretty close to Lucas Oil Stadium. They could be making a trip down here on Thanksgiving weekend potentially.
A beautiful setup as we transition to the next sectional 4, the team that was at Lucas Oil Stadium last year, Westfield. They open up at Carmel. I know that one drew a reaction from you, Kyle, when that one was announced. Game 2 features Zionsville at Noblesville. Let's hear your thoughts on that one.
Well, yeah, I mean that's one. There's 2 games that really stood out, I thought, in 6A when you look at the bracket for the first round of games, and that was one of them. Carmel's got kind of an interesting storyline. Was they were in the south side of the bracket the last 3 years, where they used to come from the north. Now they're coming from the north again. After a little bit of a delay. But Westfield took advantage of Carmel not being in that side of the bracket the last couple of years, and had really good teams that made it to the state finals. So I don't know who the favorite is necessarily. Westfield's been a team that they've kind of been a little bit up and down. Dylan Thienemann's been out with an injury, but they're expected to have him back. And man, he's a playmaker. He's going to play some offense. I think that's going to be the plan, to use him on both sides of the ball, or it was at the beginning of the year anyway. So that would be huge. And there you see Reese Bellin, who's been great all year for Carmel, at receiver. So and Carmel lost to Warren last week, so that was a little bit of a setback for them. But yeah, Westfield Carmel, that's going to be fantastic opening round game. And 2 teams that haven't played each other since 2019, back when Carmel was on that side of the bracket. So that'll be a little bit of a unique matchup. Two communities that are right there next to each other. And, Westfield's been on the come up, for a while now under Jake Gilbert. So this isn't quite as talented of a team as they've had the last 2 years without, some of those guys that they had, like Micah Hauser, who, those kind of guys don't come around very often, but still a team that's going to be very dangerous, and I think that Carmel-Westfield game is going to be really good.
Akeem, I'll put you on the spot. What do you think of this bracket? And I guess, too, have you had a chance to see Zionsville or Noblesville yet this year?
I have not. I saw Westfield really early in the season, and at that point, they were still trying to figure out their offense and their pieces. But it seems like Cole Ballard is kind of coming into his own with the dual threat ability. He put up over 100 yards rushing last game. So, again, in a winner-takes-all game, if you can have a quarterback that can create with his feet and his arm, that's a really big kind of advantage to have. And Carmel can obviously has their, passing connection that they have. So, no, I mean, that's a very intriguing matchup. Like I said, I haven't had a chance to see Zionsville or Noblesville, but I know Zionsville's on a little bit of a skid right now. But I mean, these teams are obviously familiar with each other, so yeah, I'm just excited to see what happens.
Speaking of Zionsville, 3 losses, as Akeem alluded to. They've lost to IHSAA and Brownsburg, 2 of the better teams in the state, so that's understandable. Last week, they lose to Avon, first one of the season for Avon. On the other side, Noblesville has 6 losses. This feels familiar to the way it was last year, right, where they lost to Fishers and kind of went on a skid from there. It sort of happened again, but you're playing the Westfields, the Zionsvilles, the HSEs, and then Brownsburg last week, so understandable. Let's start with Zionsville, Kyle. Concerning?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they're a team too that, they're coming up from 5A. They've been a 5A school, and made it to the state finals to play Cathedral the last 2 years. But yeah, it's kind of concerning, I think, when you're, and I actually kind of thought Avon might win that game just because the way they'd been playing, and they're a dangerous team that we'll get to their bracket here in a minute. But yeah, I think Zionsville, it's a beneficial draw for them, getting to play Noblesville, and beneficial for Noblesville as well, not to have to play Westfield or Carmel in that first game. So, maybe you can get some momentum coming out of that, whoever wins it. And like you said, Brian, Noblesville, similar season, winning 2 games early and then just not quite able to get over the hump in these conference games. And this is a conference matchup as well, even though it's a postseason game, but where they're playing a team they're familiar with in Zionsville. So yeah, I don't, Zionsville's kind of been trending in the wrong direction a little bit, but they do have, the one thing they do have going for them is they have playoff success in their recent history. Even though it was 5A, they're a team that's been playing late into November the last 2 years. So, they're used to this, and I think that will help them. Scott Turnquist has been the coach there for a while now, and so they have a good program that I think is great, has great things ahead of them. It's just, can they get over that hump and beat Noblesville, and then whoever they would face in that second game would be a difficult task, obviously.
Let's jump over to Sectional 5. Brownsburg at Ben Davis, Avon at Pike. Akeem, you've had a chance to see Brownsburg fairly recently, correct? What do you make of their opening game against Ben Davis?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of, when we talk about the non-seeding, this is probably a game you'd want to see a little later. I mean, just, again, we've talked about this just casually. Like, this could be a really great game, and it stinks that one of these teams is going to have to go home. But, Brownsburg is obviously been kind of the class of the state so far, and again with Whitaker leading the way, and a stable of running backs and the offensive line with Leighton Jones and company there. And people actually have been chirping me that I did a story on Roncalli's offensive line, but Brownsburg's offensive line is another one that can really establish a tone and control the line of scrimmage. So, shout out to the big guys up front, because they deserve credit as well. But yeah, Ben Davis is, with Goskowski a quarterback, their offense is kind of finding its footing as well, and I'm excited to see what could happen.
If you had to pick a team that you give an early edge to, obviously we're 2 weeks out, just sort of shot in the dark. Curious, who would you give the edge to there?
I mean, I can't pick against Brownsburg. I think, I just think with the way they've been playing, and just kind of obviously just as solid they are on both sides of the ball, offense, defense. You mean in this sectional or all?
Yeah, in this sectional.
Oh yeah, Brownsburg. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna be like, well, I mean, I could extrapolate
go big picture if you want.
Well, I don't. Luckily, I don't have to. But if I had to choose one, I mean, yeah.
We'll circle back to that question when Kyle needs a break again, give the poor guy a chance to breathe.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
So this game, I think, might be the most anticipated. I was just curious how this bracket would match up with each other, because these teams are very familiar with each other. And Brownsburg and Ben Davis, I covered the game earlier this season. They played in the first game of the year, and Brownsburg won 21-16. But Ben Davis did not yet have Thomas Gotkowski at quarterback, who transferred from Brownsburg last year. So that's another kind of layer to the story, or to the rivalry, I guess, between these teams. And also, Ben Davis lost to Brownsburg last year in the regular season, and then beat them handily when they actually met in the regional, not the sectional, the way it was aligned last year. it was 32-14. But I think, if I remember this correctly, I think it was 32-0 at one point in that game, which was totally surprising based on how Brownsburg had played up to that point. So, yeah, this is two teams very familiar with each other, and there aren't many teams, in my opinion, that have the all-around team that Brownsburg does. Akeem mentioned the offensive line is very good. The defense is much improved. They have a great quarterback in Jaden Whitaker. They have 3 running backs who can go for 100 yards on a given night. They have with Corey Smith at receiver. That was maybe something they didn't have last year, is a game breaker at the receiver spot. Now they have him and a couple other guys coming into their own. Like I said, the running backs, Garrett Sherrill and Caleb Marcus can really go. So they're loaded. I mean, that Brownsburg team's no joke. But Ben Davis won't be intimidated by any of that either. They have talent on their side of the ball in their locker room, offense and defense. So that's going to be a great atmosphere at Ben Davis, and I believe that's at Ben Davis if I remember right. So that'll be one of the best games I think of the first round, if not the best matchup. That
game will be at Ben Davis. As we start to take a step back here and look at 6A overall, Kyle, you mentioned it in your takeaway story, which y'all can read live now on IndyStar.com. Cathedral and their draw, they have to go through Lawrence North, with the winner getting either North Central or Lawrence Central. Akeem, you had a chance to see Cathedral Friday night, and you've seen the Lawrence North and Lawrence Central as well. So I'm curious your thoughts on the Irish's draw.
Yeah, I mean, I think this will be a great game. I saw Lawrence North against LC a couple weeks ago. Coach Maller is talking about, they were a young team at that point, and like I said, I mean, a couple games after that, these guys are going to grow up, and they have that experience now. And obviously, when you have Montez Jones at quarterback and Ali Richardson at running back, I mean, those are 2 playmakers. But Cathedral, I mean, they're very stout. I mean, their passing attack was great against Brebeuf last week. Danny O'Neill over 300 yards. And, I mean, he's a young guy, but the way he controls that offense is just amazing. I mean, he's hitting multiple receivers. He had 4 different receivers with at least 4 catches. So, I mean, that just shows a mastery of an offense. And if you have that at quarterback, that just gives you such an advantage. But, again, Montez Jones is a very capable quarterback as well, who's more of a dual threat than O'Neill would be. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like I said, when I saw Lawrence North against LC, they're a different team than they are now. So it's anyone's game, but I mean, Cathedral will definitely be a tough task.
What do you think of the O'Neill kid? He's something else. And those receivers that he has, too.
Like I said, yeah, he can sling it. And Jerron Tibbs, actually, he had an 80-yard touchdown called back by a penalty. So he wins Homecoming King at halftime, like the first play of the second half, 80 yards to the house, but called back. So, I mean, his night was probably still pretty good. They won, and you're Homecoming King, but it would have been nice with an 80-yard touchdown.
If you run 80 yards, you got to get something.
Yes, unfortunately, nothing to show. But he still had a great catch. He had like a 34-yard completion where he just kind of mossed 2 defenders. So, yeah, Dron's the real deal, and LN will have its hands full, definitely.
And I think Akeem mentioned this when he called into Twitter Spaces the other night on Friday. They just have so many big, not only Tibbs but
Wooten as well.
Wooten, they have guys who can really go get the ball. And not that Danny O'Neill's going to put it where he's pinpoint type passer anyway. But when you got that size, that really stood out to me. Watching them earlier this year, it's just they got some big dudes out there. And the question I guess for me is like, how does in that sectional, and I kind of wrote this, but those Lawrence schools, there's not always a lot of love for Cathedral on that side of town. So they're going to have to go through potentially the 2 Lawrence Township schools. So that's really interesting to me. And LN's a team that's kind of been like, a little bit up and down, but they've got some guys. Samarion Ford had, I think it was 2 weeks ago, just had an amazing game against, I believe that was Warren Central in a win. And so they've got some guys. They just, they haven't always been consistent this year, but I'm sure they're going to be ready to go. And then LC, they're probably to an even different extent this year, the way that team's played. They can really put it on you. And they were up 28-0 on Ben Davis. And not many teams, I don't think, can do that. Now, Ben Davis scored the next 29 and beat them. So that's but again, LC's one of those, maybe like the ultimate wild card team to me. It's like it seems like they could go out and play with anybody. Yep. But can they do it for a full 48-minute game? That's the question. And I think that'll be the key. To beat Cathedral, you're going to have to bring it. And but those teams, I think, will be plenty motivated to beat Cathedral. Those guys know each other on both sides, and I think that's what you see a lot in these sectional. You have rival teams playing each other. And another thing too, should mention Cathedral playing up in 6A. This has not been the norm. You know, the 2015 and 16 they played in 6A. They moved up. They won a sectional both years and then lost the regional. And at that time, you would go back down if you didn't win at least one region. I think they had to accumulate 3 success factor, getting into the weeds. But anyway, they went back down and went back to 5A, had success, and now they're back in 6A. So that's kind of another element that's different this year with the reclasses. Cathedral playing in 6A.
Let's take a step back and just go big picture on 6A. I know we touched on most of the classes just there with the 4 or 5 that we touched on, but anything else jump out to you, Kyle and Akeem?
Yeah, I was going to say the Center Grove, you know, back-to-back champions. They are playing Franklin Central in the first round at Franklin Central, which is probably the best other team in that 4-team sectional. Traditionally, that's, you know, when they've been in this sectional, that's been the case. Franklin Central kind of building their program to under Jason West, and maybe still a year away from being able to beat a team like Center Grove, but who knows? You know, they're setting high standards there, I know, and you know, trying to live up to them, and maybe not quite ready, but we'll find out. They get a chance to find out here in about 2 weeks when the Trojans come to town, and you know, Center Grove's going to run the ball. They're going to, you know, this is the time of year where they usually play their best football, so you know, don't want to you know, sleep on them, because I think they're still, you know, I've been ranking them number 1 still. I think I'm in the minority there. Most people have, and I think probably rightly so. Brownsburg's probably been the best team overall, but I say, hey, you know, they haven't lost to an in-state team since when? You know, it's been pre-pandemic. So, you know, it seems like, you know, what, 25 years ago. But but they're still really good with Tyler Cherry, and he's come in first-year quarterback, and you don't see that often where he's had this type of season for a first-year starter at quarterback. So, and then, you know, obviously have a lot of talent elsewhere. So that's definitely something too that stuck out to me.
Anything else, Akeem? Are you ready to jump to 5A?
Let's go to 5A.
All right, you're watching IndyStar Preps Weekly in case you wanted to reset. I just did that to gather my thoughts and get my brackets ready. Let's move on down to 5A. And Akeem, let's hone in on Sectional 14. That's the one that involves Franklin at Terre Haute South. Terre Haute North is traveling to Whiteland. You're familiar, obviously, with the two Central Indiana teams there, Franklin and Whiteland. Akeem, so let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, again, like Kyle was saying, no disrespect to the Terre Haute teams, but I mean, I guess this is kind of setting up for you know, the game between Franklin and Whiteland, and like Franklin's been kind of finding itself lately, and obviously when you have a player like Max Clark, you can, you know, create a lot of big plays, and Whiteland has that rushing attack, you know, with Eberton leading the way. So yeah, that's kind of, when I went to Whiteland, what kind of impressed me the most was just the atmosphere that they had there. I mean, everyone was really engaged. It was you know, very lively, so that was great to see it. So, you know, if those teams were to meet, I'm not sure where they would play, but just experiencing a game at Whiteland, that was definitely something that left me very impressed. So looking ahead, that's kind of what I would imagine most people would want to see. So, I mean, like I said, Franklin's been kind of progressing as the season goes on and kind of finding its offensive identity. You know, Bo Baker's a big play kind of receiver, and he can run the ball as well. So I'm excited to see what Franklin can do if they can get past Terre Haute South.
I'll ask you the same question that I asked for the other ones, and given your familiarity with the two teams, if you had to give an edge in that sectional to those two, assuming they advance to the final, who would you give the edge to as it stands now, 2 weeks out?
I can't.
3 weeks out.
I can't call.
Too close to call?
I can't call this. No,
Come on, Akeem.
no, I couldn't call this. I mean, if you give me like just after the opening round games, if I can kind of judge from their performances and kind of, I mean, obviously you expect both teams to be dialed in, but it's too close to call. It would be a toss-up. I mean, obviously I would expect Franklin and Whiteland to advance, but it would be a toss-up between those two teams. They're very close, and obviously they know each other well with the rivalry there, so no, it would be too close.
You played that perfectly down the middle. I tip my cap. Politicians should take notes because that was just superb. Kyle,
I'll tell you, I'd pick
Okay.
Whiteland.
Okay. Well,
I'm picking Whiteland.
then I'm going Franklin.
All right, good deal. We'll hold you to that in 3 weeks. Kyle, what did you think of this draw? It seems like one where the lottery balls got it right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's and I think that'll be a fantastic matchup. You know, it'll be a little bit more competitive, I think, than the first time those teams played each other. And you know, Franklin's got a really good team, and they've got one of the better coaches in the area, and Chris Cole, and Whiteland does too with Darren Fisher. But yeah, that should be a really fun matchup. And again, you know, shout out to the Mid-State Conference because they've had a great season. It's been fun. You know, it seems like I covered one of the games the other night with Mooresville and Martinsville. It's just been like fantastic football, very balanced at the top and deep this year. So that conference has maybe been one of the highlights of the 2022 season. Just that week in and week out, there's always good games.
How about the year that Franklin's had, the 2022 calendar year, with the girls basketball team making it to state, the boys basketball team going on their run, baseball team has Max Clark.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a kind of another seeding thing because the baseball team loses to Center Grove, and they probably shouldn't have been playing at that time. So that's a conversation for another day. But yeah.
Thank you.
We'll go 3 hours tonight.
Yeah, we'll
Just keep going. Yeah. but now, obviously you have the football team bringing it back home, 6-2.
And I think probably a team that maybe has been surprising in a lot of ways. Like I'm not sure people expected them to have this type of season. I'm sure they did, but from the outside looking in, I'm not sure that's the case that people expected them to have this type of year. But I don't know if that was expected from Whiteland either. For them to come out and just kind of, right away, it was like, man, they beat Lawrence North. I think that was week 2, and that really opened my eyes to. Like, wow, this team's legit. If you can beat a 6A team like that, home, it was at home, but home or away. I mean, that's a great win, and I think that kind of set them on the path to. They're probably going to win the Mid-State now that Mooresville beat Martinsville, and potentially, I think they might be the favorite in 5A. I don't want to say that quite yet, but you look at 5A, it's kind of wide open.
And I will add about Franklin. I was actually there during the preseason, and that senior class, they're very close together. They've been playing with each other since like middle school, and they've kind of, if you talk to them, they expected to be at this point. They know each other well. They're very close. So I like in Franklin, they're not surprised with the season that they've had, and they've kind of expected to build to this point with the group of seniors that they have.
Is it fair to say the state champion in 5A is going to come from Sectional 14? Would you go so far as to say that? And if not, who?
That's a good question. I think it's still, when you look up north, Merrillville is going to be a factor. I think, and they've traditionally been a 6A program, and they have really good athletes. Good. I mean, that's a very solid program. But I think, in all honesty, I think Whiteland's played as well as any team in 5A. They had the one loss this year, but were able to bounce back from that and. Have played really well, all year long. So, and against great competition, like I said. So, I don't know. I mean, I would definitely put them in the top, 2 or 3 in that class. But 5A's been weird this year. It's just been kind of a weird, situation with, because Cathedral bumped up, New Powell bumped down, and it kind of created this opportunity for a lot of teams. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple new, and I should mention Bloomington South is another team I think on the south side of that bracket that's got a chance to do some things. But yeah, it's just been a weird and kind of unique. And 4A's kind of been that class in the past since we've gone to 6 classes where you've seen some new teams kind of emerge and have opportunities to make it to Lucas Oil. But I think 5A might be that team or that class this year.
It's been kind of the narrative since the start of the year. I remember both of you, when we were talking at the beginning of the year, just kind of hammering, yep, this is the class that's just up for grabs. Anybody's guess as to who's going to come out of there. So.
Yeah, and there just we don't have a lot of local 5A teams this year. There's, in Decatur, we shouldn't sleep on them either. They haven't had the year that they've probably thought they would have or the year they've had. We were talking to them a lot early in the year about how this might be the year for them to emerge. They're in a different sectional. They're in 13, and they have Harrison in there with them, who's probably the favorite out of Lafayette. But, if Decatur can get enough guys, healthy and put things together, they've got enough athletes, I think, to do some damage. And if they can get past Harrison, who knows? I mean, they may be a team to look out for, too. But, yeah, we don't have, Decatur, Plainfield, Whiteland, Franklin's basically about it what we have this year in 5A.
You boys ready to jump down to 4A?
You bet.
Do it.
Akeem, you ready? All right, let's start. Thank you again for buying me time. Sectional 21, that involves Brebeuf at Northville, Lebanon at Mooresville, Roncalli at Shortridge, Washington at Attucks, and then semifinals and championships. So that's a bigger sectional with 8 teams there. Kyle, let's start with you in this group.
Yeah, so these games are the ones, like you mentioned at the top, Brian. These games will start next week. It'll be, October 21st. October 21st, we'll see these games get started. And to me, the biggest, Roncalli got a pretty advantageous draw here at the bottom half of the bracket. And none of those teams, those are all, teams that are IPS programs that have not had much success as far as playoff games go. These teams are all, I know these coaches and they work their butts off, but are at quite a disadvantage playing 4A football. In all honesty, they don't have the numbers, to compete with a program like Roncalli, unfortunately. But Javon McCrae's done a great job at Shortridge getting that thing going, and their goal was to be 500 team this year or be a winning team. But unfortunately, you get stuck playing Roncalli in that first game. And then Ramon Stallings over there at Attucks is also, they beat Shortridge a couple weeks ago. They've been building their program, so stability's been helpful there at those schools. But yeah, the top side of the bracket is really where the competition is going to be had. Brebeuf has been a team. They were leading Roncalli earlier this year at halftime, but lost 31-14. They're a program again. They were in a different class last year in 3A, but played in a state championship game against Brady Allen and that Gibson Southern team that was such a juggernaut. So, they do have history of doing well in the tournament, and we'll see what happens with them against a Northview team that's been pretty good all year too and has got a good history. They're 5-3 right now. And then the biggest game is probably Mooresville and Lebanon, the most competitive game. Lebanon's put together a really good season at 6-2 under Jeff Smock, who's he's had a good run there at Lebanon in 6 years. And then I had a chance to see Mooresville Friday in person for the first time this season, and they are also 6-2. And leaning quite heavily on a young man named Nick Patterson, who, I wrote about him that night, and then I've got another story coming out tomorrow. But, man, he is putting that team on his shoulders. They're dealing with a lot of injuries, including Hogan Denny, who they're hoping to get back. And if they have him back, and I think they will get him back, that adds a whole nother element, which they need. But Levi Dorn, really good receiver, and they're kind of putting it together. But Patterson, you put him against about anybody in 4A, he's going to make it pretty hard on you if he can get enough time and then enough help alongside him. But they beat a really good, and we'll get to Martinsville in a second, but they beat a really good Martinsville team that I think they're going to have a chance to do some damage too. But Mooresville, I'm not sure they got enough to beat Roncalli if they get to that point. And they'll have to beat Lebanon, Brebeuf, and Roncalli probably. That's a really tough road for Mooresville.
Akeem, your thoughts on this group?
Yeah, I was able to see Brebeuf this weekend, and they have Nolan Buckman playing wide receiver now, and the connection he has with Maverick Gageski is pretty impressive. And they're able to do some gadget plays with Buckman too. He's throwing some passes out of the backfield. So the trick plays, when the game's on the line, that's always a good thing to have in your back pocket. But like Kyle was saying, I mean, Brebeuf has that experience, playing in the postseason. So who knows what they're capable of doing? Again, that's a quality opponent, and I haven't had a chance to see Mooresville, but I mean, it seems like Nick Patterson's kind of taking his game to the next level. And when you have a quarterback playing at lights out, and if it's ever in a close game, he can run and pass. Like I said, I'm a sucker for a dual threat quarterback. So when you have a quarterback that can really shoulder the load and put the team on his back, that's a great thing to have. And obviously Roncalli, I've covered them a couple times, and they have their offensive line. But I'm curious what Morris can do at quarterback. Maybe if he can make some plays through the air, kind of taking the load off of Luke Haenchen, because that is quite the load that he's carrying. I know he went over 200 yards against Elder last week. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, obviously he's a very talented player, but can they get some more balance maybe? And obviously if you can run like that, the play action pass will be open. So I'm curious to see what Roncalli could do through the air. But yeah, it's setting up for maybe Mooresville, Brebeuf, Roncalli. It's a great sectional, I think.
Mm-hmm. Sectional 23, Martinsville draws Greenwood Community. Bedford North Lawrence travels to Shelbyville. Silver Creek's at Jennings County, and Edgewood at East Central. Kyle, your thoughts on this group?
Well, this is one of those, Brian, we talked about earlier about who's probably the 1 and 2, and then how do they stack up, or where do they land in the draw? Definitely the 1 and 2 here in any order is East Central and Martinsville. So they ended up on the opposite sides of each other. So it does set up nice for Martinsville to get to that championship game. And I think it's been since '96 since they won a sectional title. And that, man, being at that game at Mooresville, they had a lot of fans there. I mean, a lot of fans. They were very, and it kind of like Akeem mentioned with Whiteland, they were, or who were you saying had, Franklin, you said had the senior class had been building. That's kind of similar at Martinsville. They kind of, these guys, most of them were playing as sophomores, like Tyler Adkins at quarterback, Garrett Skaggs, who's a very good receiver, very athletic, and he's got that little explosion to him that you like at receiver. So, I really like this. Even though they lost that game, I came away feeling like, man, that's a tough, going to be a tough out in the tournament. And this matchup, you see that they will go to Greenwood, who's kind of been having a rough year this year in the first round, and then Bedford North Lawrence, which is probably the third best team in that sectional, but I think Martinsville should get through them. And then you get East Central, which East Central's got. I covered them last year against Mooresville. They were a very good program traditionally, kind of over there by Cincinnati. And they have a running back, young man, Josh Roller, who's one of the better running backs in the state. So, it'll be a very tough task for Martinsville to beat East Central, assuming that game happens. But I think Martinsville, they lost to them last year. It was not that close of a game in the sectional. I think it'll be much closer this time around. And I think it's a really hungry team. Martinsville's very close to being 8-0 right now. Mm-hmm. They lost by 3 to Decatur early in the year and came back, and then probably in all rights should have beat Mooresville. And you take Nick Patterson away, they may have beat them by a running clock. I mean, it was that big of an effort by Patterson. But that's a really good team. Good defense. I think they're going to be a handful for East Central, but that sets up to be a really good game.
Let's circle back to sectional 22. New Palestine, I can't say it still, it's fine. They travel to Mount Vernon, the battle for the Boundary Rail,
yes.
Which is just a fun nickname for a thing. I just wanted to just mention that. Richmond, Connorsville, Beech Grove, Newcastle, Pendleton Heights, Greenfield Central. What chances, does anybody in that group have a chance of derailing New Palestine? I'll throw that out to both you guys.
In short, I'd say no. New Pal is just kind of a juggernaut, especially when you put them in Class 4A. And what they've been able to get from quarterback at Tippett, he's been kind of a playmaker. I was able to see his first game, and just the way he's like a point guard, the way he distributes the ball. Everything's always on time. He knows when to run it. And obviously Grayson Thomas, as you see here, is very talented as well. So, and the defense is great. At each level of the defense, they have playmakers. So we have such a well-rounded team. And again, we've talked offensive line. They also, could make a statement for one of the best offensive lines in the state. So the way they can maul people up front, as you can see here.
Boy, those are some big boys.
Yeah. So I mean, Mount Vernon and New Pal have already met, and that game wasn't very close. So I mean, it's kind of New Pal's to lose, I would say.
Kyle, you agree with his assessment?
Not so fast, my friend. I think New Pal will win, but I think Mount Vernon. This is always a huge rivalry game, and Mount Vernon's the team that finally beat New Pal. They had that 65-game regular season winning streak 2 years ago, and that team was not. That New Pal team not as talented as this one. A lot of these guys were playing on that team, just they were young. So it's different. A different team, and I do agree with Akeem that I think New Pal will beat Mount Vernon, but I do think Mount Vernon's one of the few 4A teams, and they are the defending state champs. So there's some of that, pedigree to them. They're not going to want to lose to their rival, and these are two huge rival teams. So I think it'll be, guys like Eli Bridenthal and George Beeran and those guys. They're going to want to, go out on, and have a chance to beat New Pal in their last game. It's kind of a shame that these teams match up right off the bat, because Mount Vernon being done that first week just doesn't seem right. Whoever loses that game. But then on the interesting thing I think here too is Greenfield Central and Pendleton Heights play each other on the same side of the bracket. Those are the best two other teams in the bracket. So then you've got on the other side, potentially Beech Grove could make it to the sectional championship game with the way it's set up. So it's one of those that's very unbalanced, as far as that goes. So that'll be interesting. And Greenfield's having a good year, but unfortunately, they're going to probably run into New Pal, potentially Mount Vernon. But New Pal, I think I'd be curious. I know we talked about it before, but like how New Pal and Roncalli would play if they were in 6A. I'm kind of curious how that would look.
Anything else that jumped out to you, Kyle, in 4A? Or?
No, I think we covered that. 4A to me is, and we've touched on this before too, but 4A is just really good this year. I mean, you have the two teams we mentioned at the top, and then a lot of programs like Martinsville and, Mooresville and Lebanon, Brebeuf. I mean, programs that are really, really good that aren't going to get out of the sectional because only one team can. So 4A is loaded this year. I think it's the best I can remember Class 4A being in our area since we went to 6 classes. What was that? 2013. So it's been a while, but this to me is a loaded class.
Class 3A, 64-team classification. Let's start with sectional 29 with 8 teams. Western Boone at Crawfordsville. Danville hosts rival Tri-West. Purdue Polytechnic hosts Monrovia. Speedway travels to North Montgomery. Akeem, your Speedway spark plugs are in there, so I think that it's only right that you start us off with this group.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with the reputation I established last year, I'll just say go spark plugs, and I'll toss to Kyle.
Sorry, Kyle, I tried.
Well, they did benefit. They did benefit from this draw, certainly, because, again, we talk about the unbalanced some of these sectionals are. This is another one that's very unbalanced. Speedway is probably, and North Montgomery and Speedway, that should be a pretty good game on the bottom grouping there. But then up top, you've got Tri-West, which won the sectional last year and made it all the way to the semi-state and lost to Gibson Southern, playing Danville in the first game. Those teams are huge rivals to play right out of the gate. And Danville probably not having the overall season that they would hope to, but they're going to be up for that game. And you almost guarantee that game's going to be close and competitive. But then Western Boone also. Western Boone's probably, I would say, the favorite looking at it now. Their only loss, though, is to Tri-West by a touchdown. They lost, I think it was 41-34 a few weeks ago. So Justin Pelly and the Stars, I'm sure they'll be ready for that. They play Crawfordsville first at Crawfordsville, but that Western Boone Tri-West semifinal game, potentially, I think that's going to be the game that could decide this sectional. And if you can win this sectional, you got a chance to make a pretty good run in the tournament. And you don't have, you still have Gibson Southern out there potentially in a semi-state, but they don't have Brady Allen anymore. So at least you have that going for you. But yeah, so it's going to be, I think probably one of the more competitive sectionals, and I think Tri-West and Western Boone probably the teams to beat there. But good chance for Speedway to, they just moved up actually, so this is their first time playing 3A, moving up from 2A. They're one of the smaller 3A schools now, so this is their first time playing in 3A, and a chance for them to, with a pretty good draw here, to make it to the championship game.
Let's talk about sectional 28. You have Chittard traveling to Northwestern, but then the winner gets either Hamilton Heights or Macquana, both of whom are 6-2 on the year. Did I nail?
Macconaquah.
Oh, I was close. I wasn't that close. Then the other side of the bracket, you have fourth-ranked Oak Hill, undefeated, traveling to Guerin Catholic, 4-4. So that's fun. You go undefeated during the regular season. You have to travel up to Indianapolis. But what do you think of the matchups there?
Yeah, I think Guerin really gave Chittard a good game a few weeks ago. So you could see those two teams playing each other potentially in that sectional. And like you said, Oak Hill at 8-0, probably a little bit of a surprise what they've done this year. And I'm sure they're excited to, like you said, have to come down to play Guerin Catholic right out of the gate. But, that'll be a really tough game for them. Even though Guerin lost Ryan Zimmerman for the year, they played pretty well. So that kind of shows, I think, the depth that their team has. But, yeah, you have to think, in Chittard, the all-time leader in state championships, they have 15 under their belt as a program. So, they're thinking big like they always are, and definitely have the squad. Drew Van Vliet and that group, they've been playing up against, like they always do, against some bigger schools, and even played CBC out of St. Louis, who's absolutely loaded.
Great school.
Yeah.
Top-notch institution. Let me tell you, we can pause on that.
Wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, your children are looking for high school in St. Louis, Missouri. CBC is the way to go.
Yeah, but
think about that, Akeem.
That's a tough matchup for Chittard, but I think it only makes you better. Sometimes your record might not look the best if you're a team like Chittard because you're playing these better schools like CBC and Cathedral, but I think it's going to help them in the long run, and I still think it's theirs to lose. But this is a good sectional. Hamilton Heights is having a really good year. They're 6-2 right now, having one of their best seasons, and Tippecanoe Valley is also 8-0. So you've got some really good teams in that sectional this year, but hard to think Chittard won't be the team to beat still.
Let's jump over to Class 2A, and let's go with Sectional 39. That involves Cecina from our area, one of the teams from our area, Triton Central at Crystal House, Brownstown Central at Brown County, Switzerland at Cecina, Clarksville at Eastern Pekin. Whichever one of you wants to take lead on this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this kind of sets up for a rematch between Cecina and Triton Central. Cecina was able to take the regular season matchup by 1 point in a close game. So this will be kind of an interesting thing to see, interesting sectional to see. I mean, Cecina, they've impressed me with the offense, but the defense. I mean, they've had, a goal line stand to win the game the following week. With the Adam Young and Tamir Woods up front. And again, I'm a sucker for line play, and they can really get after the quarterback, and they're stout up front. And Mendez is a real talented playmaker at quarterback. So, like I said, it's setting up for a rematch between Triton Central and Cecina. And again, that was decided by 1 point, so I'm sure those kids are, looking forward to a chance to meet again.
Kind of like those uniforms. They're real basic, no glitz, no glamour to it, just some good old-fashioned uniforms.
They are. I like their I don't know who they remind me of. Somebody. I'm thinking.
USC a little bit,
USC
maybe?
Slightly, but a little bit more.
They need the gold pan, I suppose.
A little bit less.
It'll hit me as soon as we get off air.
Yeah.
Yes, not IU, obviously.
No, but yeah, I like them. I like them too. But yeah, that's a this game. I think Wilson covered that game for us earlier this year. Triton Central went for 2 to try to win the game there after. I believe they had a penalty, moved the ball up to the 1.5 yard line and went for it, tried to run it, got stopped. But Triton Central's got a really good team. Jay Stuckey as a quarterback and Ray Crawford at running back. And, I think Akeem mentioned it, but yeah, the defense has kind of been the story for Cecina. The last couple of years, they made it all the way to the semi-state last year in 2A with some of the similar names that are on the team, like Tamir Woods, he was on our super team, preseason team. He seems like he gets about 45 sacks per season. So, he's just a long, lanky guy who makes a lot of plays on defense. And, DJ Mendez at quarterback. And, that's just a really well-rounded defense at all levels for Cecina. You don't see that at 2A very often. But, yeah, I think they're going to, this will be a great game, I think, when they do play Triton Central. Like, they are on opposite sides of the bracket, but not a lot of competition as far as like real state contenders otherwise in that bracket. So I think we'll end up seeing those teams play in the championship game of that sectional, which I think would be the November 4th, I believe, is when those sectional championships would be played.
Anything else, Kyle, jump out to you? And let's just open it up to Class A as well. I know Lutheran's down there in Class A, the defending champs, odds-on favorites, it sounds like, to repeat. And then Akeem, you as well. Anything else from those lower classes standing out to you?
No, I mean, I'll mention Lutheran. I saw them against Cecina, and they were able to beat Cecina. Jackson Willis, their quarterback there, is obviously replacing a talented guy in Montese Clay, but as a sophomore, he's putting up great numbers. I believe 26 touchdowns on the season. They have a really wide-open kind of spread offense that, I mean, some of the throws that he made against Cecina were some of the best throws I've seen at any level. So, I mean, again, when you have a talented quarterback like that, Lutheran is kind of, I would say, yeah, they're after winning last year, that win streak is continuing, and they have a chance to maybe run it back. So they've been a team that really has stood out to me, and at Class A they can go up against anyone. So playing against Class A competition, I like their chances at repeating.
And they do have probably a tougher sectional than a lot of 1A teams do. They have to go to South Putnam. I think they're at South Putnam, but yeah, South Putnam's been pretty good all season long. They're 7-1. And their only lost game to a really good 3A team, Owen Valley. So, that's something Lutheran can't overlook out of the first round. And then Covenant Christian is also in their sectional, which Covenant 2 years ago was a state champion, and last year gave Lutheran their toughest game in the sectional championship game, I believe it was, only won by a touchdown. So, not the easiest of routes for Lutheran. The draw didn't really help them any this year in sectional 47. But I think definitely, like Akeem said, I mean, they've got, Jackson Willis has been really good, stepped right in at quarterback like they haven't missed a beat at all. So, and that's just a program right now that's kind of like, they're just like a steamroller, it seems like. So year in and year out, they're either making it to the state championship or getting one step away or now winning. They won their first one last year. It was kind of that progression of, and then they're finally breaking through and winning one. And now I think they've got a lot of confidence that they can probably do it again. I was going to mention the other thing that kind of stood out to me, and this is not our area necessarily, but Andrean last year was the 2A champion, and they're in sectional 33 up north, and their sectional is not easy either. They have a LaVille team in there that's 8-0, so that's something to kind of keep an eye on too, is how Andrean does up there. But Andrean Of course, Drake Bowen, who plays for them, is one of the guys. I want to mention them because he's one of the guys up for Mr. Football and a multi-sport guy who won a state championship already, and he was the Gatorade Player of the Year last year. So I know people in Central Indiana always don't want to hear about it from other areas of the state necessarily, but he's a guy who deserves quite a bit of mention, and he's having a good year again. So credit to him, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see them playing again down here Thanksgiving weekend.
We got a couple minutes left, and for a treat for the people who've stuck around here, Kyle, let's get your top 3-4 candidates, front runners for Mr. Football. I'm curious. We haven't dove into that yet on the show.
Yeah, I'm planning to write a little bit more about that, this coming week. I haven't dived into like all the numbers yet, but Bowen is definitely one. If he's not the top guy, he's definitely on the, whatever number you want to put out there, he's on the list. He's got to be. And then Luke Hansen, I think is with the numbers he's putting up at Roncalli, deserves a lot of mention, from the running back position, and I know the offensive line too. You could name those guys and put them. It's always hard for a lineman. They have the how it works here is they have Mr. Football awards for positions. So somebody from that team, Trevor Locke probably would be the one who would be up for that award. But it's hard to quantify for when you're comparing running backs, receivers, or quarterbacks for those guys. As we saw with even like Caden Curry, who plays a great defensive lineman, but it's just hard for those guys to win an award like that. But yeah, it's been an interesting year, I think, for quarterbacks. There's a lot of good ones out there, but there's not maybe that Brady Allen type of player at quarterback. So, but you have I covered Nick Patterson's game last week, and you look at his career numbers and his winning, and he hasn't won a state championship, but he's a guy from a career standpoint. I think he should be in the mix. If you're talking about Mr. Football type guys. So, I'll write more about that and kind of dive into it a little bit more. But those are a few names I think anyway that you could put out there.
Akeem, you want to venture a guess?
Yeah, no, I don't really have anyone outside of Kyle's list. I mean, obviously someone like Josh Mickens is a very talented player as well. But again, it's if you're double teamed and triple teamed on every play, it's kind of hard to quantify the impact that a defensive lineman is actually making. So it's going to be hard for someone playing defense to win that award, like Kyle was saying. But no, he nailed it. Drake Bowen. I mean, he's a 5-star commit. He's a very talented player. Luke Hansen is putting up historic numbers. So it'll be tough to call, but luckily I don't have to decide that. So
put you on the spot one last time, Akeem. Give me a state champion from 6A and a champion from 5A. We'll check and see where your prediction evolves as we get closer and where you're at the end of the year.
I'll go Brownsburg in 6A. 5A.
You already know my 5A.
Who's your 5A?
I got Whiteland. I'm taking
Oh, yeah. I mean, do I? No, Brian, I'm not going to let you trick me. I can't.
I'm not trying to trick you. I'm genuinely curious.
Okay,
I think that it'd be fun to look at this back at this in a couple weeks.
Yeah, no, Franklin is obviously, again, like I said, the way that they've been progressing. If I had to pick one team, I'd go Whiteland. Just as stout they are on defense and offense. They have very talented wide receivers as well that double on defense. So, if I had to choose one, I guess it'd be Whiteland.
Yeah, but you think Franklin's going to beat him, so that's
that'd be hard
well,
to win.
I just want to prove Kyle wrong. That's yes. If I had to choose between being right and proving Kyle wrong, it's always proving Kyle wrong.
That's good. That's good, and that's why you were in first place for the picks competition. We love it. Kyle, before we get out of here, you have your picks, your instant reaction. To the sectional draw 10 takeaways. What else can we expect from you this week on the football front?
Yeah, I'm going to do kind of a look at the most interesting matchups for the sectional, top whatever games to look forward to. I know a few we already talked about a few of those for sure with Brownsburg, Ben Davis, and Westfield Carmel, and some of those games. So yeah, we'll talk, kind of dive into that a little bit more. I'll break down all the area sectionals with some players to watch and things like that. And then, we'll do our shows too, and we'll talk, not to get too far ahead, but because we still have great games coming up this week, and we'll talk more about that on our show Tuesday. But so we don't need to dive into that. But as a teaser, Cathedral in Center Grove and IHSAA Brownsburg. That's like its own little tournament right there. That's 1 against 4 and 2 against 3. So it doesn't get much better than that to end the regular season. So we can't just sleep on the last week of the week 9. We still got more to go.
I wanted to. Akeem didn't want to let me. I guess you won't either, but that's fine. We thank you all so much for watching. As Kyle mentioned, we'll be back with you all on Tuesday, I think is the plan. Kyle's Spaces after every game on Friday nights. If you're not tuning in, you're really missing out. And I think that about covers it. Akeem, you want to share some parting words of wisdom before we call it a night? It's getting close to my
I love
bedtime.
how you put him on the spot. I love it.
I think we ended last year by saying how I never won a game in high school, or I won like 3 games in high school and never played in the postseason. So no, let's end on a higher note than that. Brian, take it away.
I don't got anything. Mizzou lost. The Cardinals lost. So I mean, hockey starts next week. I know.
There you go.
Kyle's pretty.
Hockey
I'm the only
preseason.
one who cares about that, but it's exciting. I'm excited. So that's a good note. Hockey starts Saturday. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to Clark for getting us on off the air. Thank you for Kyle for being amazing. And thank you, Akeem, for being here. Thank you. We'll talk to you all on Tuesday.